Hello and welcome to another edition of Resource Review. We analyse the latest teaching resources, both here in the studio and in the classroom. Today we're looking at resources for secondary English. Recommending today's resources is our subject specialist, Simon Gibbons. Simon is the secondary PGCE English course leader at De Montfort University, Bedford. We also have John Hickman, a former teacher with 25 years of experience in the classroom. He is now English advisor for the London Borough of Redbridge. Also on the panel is Adrienne Jones, a freelance education consultant, resource expert and former teacher. Well, it's great to see you all here. Thanks for coming. Simon, as our expert, you're recommending 3 ICT-based resources for us to discuss for secondary English. Now, you seem quite taken with ICT. What is it about these 3?
Well, they're each very different, and the fact they're ICT is slightly coincidental in a way, but I think if you're looking at English lessons and resources for English, I've got a kind of natural abhorrence to textbooks, so I'm looking for other things. And the CD-ROM we're looking at offers particular things to do with poetry which I don't think you could get in a text-based resource, really. I mean, part of its whole project is that it relieves you of some of the text things you have to do. And the 2 websites really are resources for teachers as much as they're for children, I suppose, and it's about what teachers can access through using the internet now to help them with their English teaching, really. OK, well, let's kick off with the CD-ROM then. It's called Unlocking Literature from Nate. Tell us more about it. Well, it's interesting actually because there's nothing new on here as such. What it takes all the poems that are used at GCSE level now in the anthologies, which I have to say can be taught in some quite dry ways because teachers are under a lot of pressure to cover an enormous amount of poetry for GCSE. What this has done is it's taken really imaginative approaches to poetry that all teachers have been using in English classes, cutting poems up, rewriting poems without the line breaks so you can think about how to structure them, blanking out poems and encouraging children to guess where the words go and offering them the chance to construct their own poems. Let's
go and see the resource in action then. We're going to John Cabot City Technology School in Bristol, where teacher Chris Davies is using the resource.
Can you tell me what a poem is, in your opinion? Hannah? A poem can be a limerick. Yes, Kim.
Today I was teaching Year 7 students about a poem called The Eagle by Tennyson. An activity I set the students to do was to give the students the poem completely scrambled. The students had 10 minutes to use the words by Tennyson, beautiful words, to make a poem of their own. And once they'd done that, they emailed it to me and we had the opportunity to share some of the poems that they'd written. And of course, using such beautiful words, it's very difficult to write a bad poem, which is particularly appealing to students, some of whom may be very shy creatively. I think the lesson showed that there were some really, really nice poems.
The sun beat down on the eagle's beady eyes
as he was watching across the mountaintop
with his crooked feathers and razor-sharp claws.
Very good, nice.
I suppose the appeal is once you have the poems electronically, you can, for example, cut and paste them, put them onto email, send them to students, use them on PowerPoints, use them on whiteboards. A lot of young people today find poetry difficult to access and come to terms with. And if it becomes fast and potentially more exciting, then students are more inclined to be engaged with the material. One of the downsides to this resource, and in fairness to them there was a warning about it, there are some difficulties running it over a school network. I had to approach our system administrator to have it loaded on. Even then there were aspects of the CD-ROM and the resources on it that wouldn't run, and some of the JavaScript applications in particular don't seem happy to run over a school network. I think the best thing about the resource is many ideas and the fact that all the poems are listed electronically and together. I don't have to trawl the internet for them. It's not something I've had to build up. A new teacher could have this handed to them and fantastic, all the resources would be there to hand.
That's awesome, gives me goosebumps, that one. Fantastic, very good.
Well, John, if I could come to you first. Poetry strikes me as quite a difficult to access subject. Does this kind of resource enhance accessibility?
I think it does. I'm quite wary sometimes of the sorts of ICT resources that have been pushed out to schools because they're doing nothing that a good teacher in the classroom can't do. This one offers a sort of range of strategies with giving pupils the power to manipulate text, to get into text, work with it. With increasing use of whiteboards in the classroom, it also gives the teacher the power to get the text, as you see on the clip, to get the text onto the screen and for the students to see the teacher manipulating it and having access to the way in which text can be used.
So that's sort of more superior to perhaps the older approach of actually just cutting up physically photocopied poems. But in theory, some of the things that it enables you to do, you could do yourself in a word processing package, say, and put that up on the whiteboard and save yourself quite a bit of money.
You could, but what price kind of sanity and getting asleep at night, you know? I mean, these are the things that you can't put a price on, and I think the authors themselves are quite upfront in this, saying that there's nothing new on there. It's
the only proviso with it, though, is that it's got pre-1914 poetry, where it lists all the poems that are on the various syllabuses and in the anthologies. But with the post-1914, it just lists the poets, and you haven't got the availability of all the poems, which means that if teachers do want to be able to cut and paste and walls and so on, they do have to do it themselves.
Well, I think Adrian's right. I mean, it's got the list there of the poems and the poets that are on the syllabuses and in the anthologies, and it's got some activity suggested, but it doesn't have the poems themselves in there, which I'm guessing is copyright issues. In that sense, there's less value there than there is certainly in the pre-1914 stuff. Yeah.
I think one thing that we haven't mentioned as well that's very useful is the fact that you can click on an icon and get played through a teacher doing the activity.
So there is support there to show teachers how to use it.
So it's not just a text telling you what to do, there's an example of how it works in a classroom. So for inexperienced teachers, that's, again, a really useful resource.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Now let's move on to the second resource, which is the Poetry Society website. Simon, we've got a little bit of it here on the table, but I mean, why this website? Presumably there are many websites out there.
Yeah, lots of websites, lots of poetry websites, but I think that the Poetry Society is probably the original and best, I should say. I mean, what's interesting about it is it's not specifically for teachers. It covers all areas of poetry. It's for anyone who's an enthusiast, a writer of poetry, a reader of poetry, a buyer of poetry. My guess would be, I hope, that all English teachers love poetry, and therefore they would want to access this and enjoy some of the kind of extracurricular stuff there.
OK, well, let's head back to John Cabot City Technology College in Bristol and see what our teacher, Chris Davies, thinks of this resource.
So this is the Poetry Society website, the homepage. Now, this is a web page dedicated to poetry, not just the teaching of poetry, so poetry as history, poetry as performance and events. All aspects of poetry are featured on here. We've got links to education and poetry for use in secondary school. There is a link called Poetry Class. Click on that, and in there we have some poetry lessons. Here we've got a simile and metaphor exercise. The lesson invited me to discuss with the students the idea of simile and metaphor. We discussed the idea that something could be like something could be similar to, and that was a simile, and then we asked the students to go a stage further and describe something literally as being something else.
The moon is a huge snowball in disguise, heading towards us, forever being held back and melting in places.
The lesson plans are arranged in key stages, which is very, very helpful. Forums to interact with other teachers, I guess, kids' poetry sites in particular, possibilities for training and the teaching of poetries, how to contact the training teams available. Useful addition, and it will appear on my favourites, definitely.
Simon, seeing the resource there demonstrated, I mean, it seems vast. There's a lot on this site. How can teachers begin to pick out what they need?
I think if you're a teacher and you're going to it thinking, what am I going to do with my class, you'd probably go instantly to the poetry class aspect of it, and then you'd go to the lesson plans, and as the teacher on the video said, they're organised into key stages. So if you're looking for something to do with a poem of a particular year group, that would be where you'd instantly go. And I guess the rest of the stuff that is on offer would be for you kind of to explore at your leisure. Although you may have specific things to want to pursue. For instance, there are lots of people who want to get poets into schools and poets to work with kids, and the Poetry Society website's got links to lots of poets who work with children in schools. So if you've got a specific aim, and I do frequently have teachers say, oh God, I'd like to get a poet in, this is probably the first port of call if you wanted to do that.
John, do you think involving the poet is a good way to bring poetry to life?
Yeah, it's something. The Poetry Society has been doing it for a lot of years. I remember 30 years ago them helping me get poets into school, and they're still doing it. And certainly in my authority at the moment, there's at least 4 schools that use the Poetry Society as a way of getting real poets into school. And I think Simon's right that the website provides an insight into what real writers do, and there's a frequently asked questions section there again, which gives you an insight into what poets do and the sort of networks they form. And I think that's good for teachers and it's good for kids to see that.
Adrienne, this is a free resource. Is that going to make it more attractive to teachers?
Inevitably. And the fact that it's an interesting site and it's very easily navigated, and it's also organic. It's regularly updated, and it has a simplicity about it that makes it very easy to use.
We seem to be discussing this resource very generally, but for teachers who are really under pressure, how are they going to come in and get the most out of this resource?
Well, as I say, I think if you're going to go for a instant kind of reward as a teacher, you would go to the poetry class bit, you'd say, OK, I've got my Year 9s in front of me, and there will be a lesson there written by a poet saying, here's my poem, this is what you might want to do in your class, and it'll be something very concrete like, let's have a look at metaphor or whatever. So there'll be some instant kind of rewards. If you are desperate at 8:45 in the morning, you've got a class turning up in 5 minutes, you could simply download the stuff and use it. I don't think that's the best part of this resource, but I think that's a very tangible and concrete thing you can gain from it.
Well, thank you all very much. Moving away from poetry for the time being and opening up to a broader secondary English resource, let's look at the third one that Simon has chosen, and this is Project Gutenberg website. Simon, tell us more about this website.
It's a fascinating website. It's basically a kind of online library of classic literature, I suppose. It does include poetry. It's basically texts published originally, I guess, before 1900, so they're out of copyright, and they've been put online in downloadable form, and there are 16,000 texts there. I mean, it's just an amazing volume of text, and there's a real interesting philosophy the whole site's got about making text accessible.
How do you see it working? Is this a resource for teachers again, or are pupils going to go to this and start reading new books, e-books?
Well, I think it's interesting actually. Reading off the screen is quite a difficult thing to do. I'm rubbish at it, I have to say. I can't do it. But what I've used it for as a teacher is quite often I want to say, let's look at ghost stories, and I want to look at 8 different openings of a ghost story, classic ghost fiction. Now, I can go and search around in the library, I can go and find 8 books by whatever, or I can go on here and I'll instantly get printable pages, 8 opening pages of 8 novels. So it's a very interesting way to get quick looks at a whole range of fiction. And the kind of Gutenberg name, I guess, is about the printing press and about the printing press making information accessible to the masses in the 15th century. So I guess it's that kind of philosophy that lies behind it. So I kind of like that as well, because I'm a bit hippie.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But just to summarise, we've been looking at 3 resources for secondary English. The first was the CD-ROM Unlocking Literature from Nate. Secondly, the Poetry Society website. And lastly, the Project Gutenberg website. Don't forget that for more information on all of these resources and to post your own comments, you can go to our website, that's teachers.tv/resource review, or you can email us, resourcereview@teachers.tv. So many thanks to our panellists, to Simon, to John and to Adrienne. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Resource Review. Bye-bye.